Thank you Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Jess here. Hope you're doing fantastic. If you're new to the channel and to the studio, I'm Jess and I'm an artist and illustrator who loves creating challenges in her sketchbook. I love experimenting with different mediums and styles. I create oil paintings and acrylic paintings. But if you're familiar with my channel, you know I absolutely love spending time and drawing or painting in my sketchbook. And in this video, we're gonna actually work in this little mini sketchbook that I have that I've been meaning to finish and fill up. It's actually a little smaller than my hand. So I'm really excited to show you guys how I fill up my mini sketchbook for today with some gouache portraits. I hope you will paint along with me, so grab your sketchbook and let's get started. So prior to beginning painting, I have already gessoed my 2 pages and now I'm just going to tape off the edges so that I have a nice, clean, sharp border. I decided to use a limited color palette of analogous colors for today, and by the way, if you want some more information on gesso and how to use it, you can check out my previous video. I'm also preparing my palette, my paints, and my craft Mo brushes, and the first portrait I'm going to do is going to be with a warm palette, so I'm first laying out those. Now the next step is to prepare our sketch. With every painting or portrait that I begin, I love creating an underpainting. I decided to do a bright orange tone for this portrait on the left, and I'm going to be sticking with only warm colors for this portrait. This color is called Marigold Yellow by Winsor & Newton, and I absolutely love their gouache. With a little bit of water and some of the pigment, I'm able to create a beautiful underpainting. And since I always get asked about pencil smudging when you begin painting, I like to use a hard pencil, meaning a 2H or 5H, and that way when you begin painting, your pencil doesn't smudge. And since I gessoed my sketchbook spread, I'm able to lift up the highlights of my portrait, and I'm just looking at the general shapes of my reference, which I will have the links in the description below. Since the paper is gessoed, the gouache is not able to seep through the paper, and I'm able to lift up those highlights. Once that's layers dry of the orange, I go in with my next shade, which I chose this warm magenta color, and I start looking at the midtones and the shadows. You guys know I always say that it's all about the lighting, so I'm constantly looking to create that beautiful lighting in my work. Making sure that you have the highlights and midtones and shadows are one of the most crucial things for your artwork. Now, as I decided to spend some time creating these portraits and practicing in my sketchbook using these limited color palettes, I want to talk a little bit more about the reference. Whenever I'm using a reference, I'm just using it as a little guide for myself, but I'm also trying to change it up a little bit and create a little more of my own stylization. There was a time where I really relied on a reference and tried to make it exactly look like that, and there was a benefit to it, absolutely. I learned so much with proportion and getting the proper likeness, but I've just reached a stage in my journey and in my art where I like to bring a little bit more of my, voice and style to my work. So once I've started to establish my main shadows, I like to mix the 2 colors together, the marigold yellow, orangish color that I have, and the magenta to create a little bit more of a blended mid-tone in between the shadow and the first tone that I put down. And as I'm painting, I'm really getting to know my subject and my reference. I'm looking at all the clues that I see, mostly focusing on the really big shapes and getting the whole sketch in very, very roughly. And once I have that in and the layers keep drawing, I can start with my highlights. And in this moment is where I begin to slow down and really look at the highlight shapes, and these are the parts that begin to bring your painting together. I've recently been focusing on some messy brush strokes and having a lot of movement when I'm putting down values, and that's something that I really like to focus on since many of my work, and especially over the previous years, I really liked to create some detailed, really tight drawings and paintings. So whenever I'm painting now in my sketchbook, I try to loosen up a little bit to really show the brush strokes and have them be a part of my finished pieces. So as the details begin to unfold themselves and you begin to look at all of the values that you see in your reference, I like to slow down and create really mindful marks to make sure that all of my proportions and my shadows are there. And I also like to step back and take a look at my piece from afar. It's a really good tip to take your arms and stretch out your sketchbook right in front of you to make sure you see your piece from a little bit of a distance, because as we're at our desk and we're kind of hunched over painting, we can actually miss some details before we finish the piece. And speaking of finished pieces, the finished warm sketch is complete, and now I decided to do the next portrait with some cool tones. I decided to start off with this light teal color for my underpainting, and I'm basically blocking in the whole shape with a little bit of water and the pigment itself. Gouache is great because you're able to layer it, and you can also use it very lightly like watercolor, or you can start off super opaque and paint it as if you're using oil. But personally, I found that the underpainting with a really light sort of washy tone works really great for me, and that way I'm able to work in thin layers, and once they each dry, I can add more and add more. So once my underpainting layer dried and I have punched out some of the little highlights, as you can see there, I go in with more darker shade and again start getting in those shadows. For this portrait, I was wanting to do a little bit less details and more of a washy tone for each of the values of the portrait. And whenever I start the sketch, I'm always looking at the big shapes. So that is a really big key. Always look at the big shapes, and especially the big shapes of shadows. I basically turn everything into shapes, and then I try to apply that and put it into my paper. I also wanted this portrait to be a bit more loose, and I also decided to keep the colors and shades of blue pretty much limited. And along with every sketch, it's always a back and forth process on getting to know the subject and registering all the values that you see. So as the details begin to reveal themselves, I'm just keeping on slowing down and really finding those values. I've been itching to paint, and I was so excited to paint with gouache again. I love spending time to really experiment with some limited colors and also practicing my proportions and portraiture. You guys know that I love to mix it up and always create a balance and variety in my work, but this definitely was like a feel-good hour of painting and drawing and just having fun with my gouache. So now I'm finishing up the second portrait, and I'm adding some more mid-tones, and I'm keeping all of the layers pretty much washy. And as I go on, I create more of a thicker texture for the shadows, and the mid-tones, I keep mixing them with a little bit more water. And before I show you guys the close-ups and finished reveals of both of these portraits, I like to talk about today's sponsor. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives, which offers thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. Skillshare classes include a combination of video lessons and a class project. It also has a discussion board, which is probably one of my favorites, where you can see other students' work and also comment and get feedback on yours. I love going on Skillshare and seeing the wide variety of classes that they have. I always know that I can try something new, and after taking some classes on there, I love the Odd Bodies class by Tom Froese. I actually did one of my sketchbook spreads doing one of these classes, and he presents a really great project exaggerating the shapes and figures of the body. It really put me outside of my comfort zone and what I'm normally used to drawing, and I fell in love experimenting with new topics and ways and styles of creating. There are honestly endless possibilities and classes and ways that you can learn on Skillshare, and I'll have a unique link in the description, so be sure to click it and get a free trial. Thank you Skillshare so much for sponsoring, and let's get back into the video. So here are the finished two portraits that I created using gouache. They were a lot of fun, and I've been really loving the limited color palettes and using warm or cool colors whenever I'm creating. Art is all about experimenting and trying out new things whenever you're creating, and of course, having fun. So I hope you guys have been creative. I hope you have been experimenting, and remember to trust the process and to never give up. I'm glad I got to almost finish this little mini sketchbook, and a mini sketchbook tour will be coming up shortly, so stay tuned for that. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification button. You can also check out my Patreon as well as my website, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!